You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay, everybody. How are you doing? Happy Friday. We made it to the end of the week. There's a Bob Dylan song called Who Killed Davy Moore? And it's about a boxer named Davy Moore. And Bob Dylan is asking the question, who killed Davy Moore? Why and what's the reason for? And it's like, not me. Everybody's denying that they're responsible. So not the other boxer, not the referee. And not the sport itself. And in making a murderer, obviously the system was to blame, right? The system was the most evil thing. And those in power, those who had power and abused power, were really put in the bullseye. And in convicting a murderer, now the new target is the true believers, is the people that were fooled, and the hive mentality that it created. So what it really sets out to do is convince everybody that Stephen Avery is guilty. Sean Reck has called this an exhaustive, excuse me, I may be paraphrasing, but to words to that effect, exhaustive investigation. But my argument is quite different. And when I come back from the break, we're going to talk about who really killed Teresa Halbach, who's responsible, right after this break. I'll meet you on the other side. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. And it doesn't stop there. Convicting a murderer doesn't stop there with targeting and really kind of shaming in some ways the true believers, the supporters, the people trying to get Avery out of prison. Like they're the people to blame for this phenomenon. Obviously, they're the result of this phenomenon, but they put up they use without permission. Cassie, she's also a West Memphis 3 true believer. And I get it. She's hard to take. I think even she would say she's rough around the edges. Maybe that's the nicest way to put that. But yet there is no mention of the movement, the lawyers. You know, I'm going to come back and discuss how this fits in and a little bit more about innocence fraud in another live. But innocence fraud, this is the result, is what I'm saying. These people are the result of what I'd call unethical lawyers, people who crusaders, far left radicals who really want to abolish our entire justice system. But instead, we get also a little victim blaming to go along with it. So Candace Owens, as a host for this, is just the worst timing in the world, because right when this is released is at the time that Candace Owens she's the host of Convicting a Murderer, but she's also been supporting the Tate brothers, naming their victims. And there was just a decision in the Florida suit against the Tates that they can no longer name the victims. And if you expect Candace Owens to go back, I hope they will. I would encourage her to do that and beep out the names of the victims. And she protected convicted, what do you call it? MAPS, or what someone else would call MAPS, predators. People who had victimized this woman when she was not of age. And Candace Owens is out there defending them. So it looks very odd. It's almost like as if someone who didn't like Candace Owens had edited in these clips, because they're just every single one of them. Every time she mentions victims, it's just filled with irony. For example, it's never easy for a victim to come forward and leave. So what she's talking about here is she's talking about Steven Avery's girlfriend, who suffered through so much abuse that she attempted to eat rat poison to get away from Steven Avery. And she's schooling the people who watched the HLN interview, like Cassie, who said, oh, she's lying. She's just a drunk liar. And Candace Owens is schooling everybody and saying, oh, well, both, you can tell the truth and be an alcoholic or have a drinking issue at the same time. Two things can exist at the same time. And it's just filled with irony, as she is called into question every single one of the Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate's victims, motives, character. So one of the more interesting parts of the third episode is when Candace Owens talks about Teresa Halbach and how she didn't listen to her gut instincts. But before that, let's take a look at I think this exemplifies the character of some of these lawyers. Let's look at Jerry Buting's tweet, shall we? About making a murderer. And this was also something I found kind of hilarious. So if you're not following me on Twitter, I would really encourage you to. And if you're interested, and if you like this show, because I really participate on that platform more than any other. And it will give you an idea of what I'm thinking about, what's coming up, and what's going on in true crime. But Jerry Buting, this is Steven Avery's lawyer from 2006 to 2007. But yet, when Making a Murderer came out, he went on a speaking tour, right, all over, and basically presented himself like he was still fighting the good fight. That's how he would describe it, not how I would describe it. I would say he was still continuing to grift or trying to get as much money as he could on the making a murderer grift. That's my opinion. So he writes, theme of convicting a murderer is to trash Avery based largely on inadmissible rumors and gossip. One interviewee expressly stated it was just bar talk. I had no proof that she said it or proof that it really did happen. It's just what my friend told her. So, wow, that sounds awfully sketch, doesn't it? Until you, and this is Teresa Halbach's cousin who's speaking. And she's saying, look, I had no proof that any of this actually happened. It's just something that she said to me, Teresa said to me in a bar. And what the subject of the conversation was the time Teresa was telling her cousin Wendy about the time that she went over to the Avery salvage yard and Stephen Avery answered the door wearing a towel. And it wasn't admissible in court because it was considered hearsay. So Jerry Buting is saying, yeah, this is really poor standards for this documentary. Not only are they defaming Stephen Avery, but they're also using a lot of sketch testimony. But right after that, in Convicting a Murderer, you can hear Stephen Avery admit to it. Said, yeah, I answered the door wearing a towel. So it seems like that really did happen, and it wasn't malicious gossip or put in there to just pile on. You know, I'm really surprised by the reaction to Convicting a Murderer. It seems like it's just preaching to the converted, and that the really, at least right now, I haven't heard a lot of people say it totally changed my mind. And the people that I've seen who are supporters on their social media, they're saying they're not watching it at all. They wouldn't ever have anything to do with it. So I hope it's getting through to people. But this is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous that, you know, I'm really surprised that they didn't come out and say, with all the stories about, and really the early episodes in this documentary talk about Stephen Avery's criminal behavior, which started very early in life, as psychopaths do, with abusing animals and targeting women. This is a guy who's always targeted women, but Convicting a Murderer would like you to believe that the reason Stephen Avery targeted Teresa Halbach was because he was so hurt, because he had been, quote, wrongfully convicted, unquote, and wrongly accused by Penny Bernstein. And as you know, I'm just not really a believer that happened. I think he did it. How, you know, his hair was found on Penny Bernstein. Penny Bernstein's hair was found on his clothing. How'd that happen? How come Penny Bernstein said her attacker was 5'6" and Stephen Avery's maybe 5'5"? I've also heard him described as 5'6". So either she's right on target or an inch off. And Gregory Allen, is 5'11" according to his driver's license. He's also described as 5'10" in some of his criminal, but that is way off. I mean, that's also also his MO seems to be to hide his face. Not so Stephen Avery. Also, his voice was described as high. And here I'm going to ask this question. Did making a murderer and those lawyers get the idea to run with this planting of evidence because it was something that happened in the previous case? Done by the wrongful conviction movement. How rare a hair with a bulb is to find? And why do they constantly sing this refrain that it was a grape and not an attempted murder? I know the answer to that. Pick me. The answer is so they want you to think that this DNA came from ASA and it wasn't Stephen Avery just amping up his criminal behavior. And from what I've learned about the wrongful conviction movement, I've come to the conclusion that they are a criminal enterprise. I mean, think about it. Who else would, there's so many examples, but who else would not say anything? Nobody disavowed what happened with the Anthony Porter all-story Simon thing. In fact, they just keep doubling down and saying we got it right when we sloppily investigated looking for innocence Anthony Porter's case. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. I'll meet you on the other side of the break. But this is not, in my opinion, a moral movement. It's a corrupt, dangerous, criminal movement. And I'm getting very tired of seeing it done by lawyers. And the reason why people don't speak up about it is because they're very afraid. They're very rich. They have the means and the opportunity to sue you out of existence. And also, and this seems to happen to the victims' families, is to make this kind of media like Making a Murderer and make you a villain and basically have a pitchforky mob run after you. You're running from a mob of people who all think that they are seeking justice, so that you can't work, you can't make money. You become extremely distrustful of other people and paranoid. Look at the people who have been targeted by other cults. And that's the same thing that this movement does, and it's the same reaction that the people who deal with cults deal with. It's the same kind of emotions, same kind of situations. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll meet you on the other side of the break. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. And here's just a quick question. Why is Stephen Avery's answer to everything test the DNA? Test more DNA testing. And why did he confess in prison? I mean, he really had no reason to make himself look bigger. He was already doing time for really serious charge with Sandra Morris. So he had no need to make himself look bigger or criminal. And you can see if you just look up Steven Avery inmate, the reactions the inmates have, like this guy, I think one of them said, I'm going to kill this guy. Like he had no problem. He was not going to be a victim in prison, Steven Avery. But he told his cellmate that he did this, that he was responsible for the attempted murder, kidnapping, assault on Penny Bernstein. And everything is being sort of excused, like he's an exoneree, so of course he'd be angry. But we never saw any of that anger in his interviews. In fact, he told Penny Bernstein, it's over now, don't worry about it. I'm over it, basically. So I'm going to read this the best I can. But this is from Ken Kratt's book. In prison for the assault of Penny Bernstein, Steven sat in his 6x8 cell day after day, focused on what he intended to do upon his release. And this is what he was dreaming about doing. This is me talking, not reading. This is what he was dreaming about doing. I'll say this in the most YouTube-friendly way I can. Abduct, SA, TORTURE, and kill a young woman. Avery said as much to fellow inmate Jesse W. Werlin, and even showed Werlin drawings of the T chamber, quote unquote, he intended to construct. His prison sidekick assisted with the artwork. Teresa's future abduction, essay, and death were recounted at the Green Bay Correctional Institution to any inmate who would listen. Avery had planned the brutal attack down to the location, the Avery Salvage Yard. And Ken Kratz reminds everybody that Avery had become a bit of a DNA expert at this point. And his favorite way of disposing of things, burning things, heat, especially a big fire, is the only thing that destroys all DNA left on or in the body, semen included. Eliminating DNA at the crime scene, Steven knew, was the best way to avoid having a murder pinned on him. He becomes somewhat of a DNA expert during his 18 years of incarceration, benefiting from his front row seats to scientific advances in the field. But convicting a murderer is taking what Steven Avery told Jody, which is all bees owe him, as fact, instead of what I think it is, which is an appeal for sympathy and a massive rationalization. These Averys are incredibly cunning and incredibly manipulative, and they have manipulated the entire world, including the convicting a murderer people, in my opinion. Or they're playing dumb, because I think Sean Reck, who directed A Murder in the Park, understands this grift. He understands innocence fraud intimately. And I highly recommend, if you're not going to read Martin Pribe's book, Crooked City, I would highly recommend his film A Murder in the Park, just so you can see with your own eyes how a innocence fraud, in my opinion, how the grift is done. And I laugh because I'm doing my best to, avoid some kind of libel suit from these highly litigious bunch. But really, ultimately, who killed Teresa Halbach, in my opinion, it goes back to the press, the people, the lawyers like Michael Griesbach, who took 2 days before letting Steven Avery out and declaring him innocent. He said he read the entire transcripts in 2 days, made this decision, and rubber stamped it. And I would be much more likely to come forward and say, oh, well, Griesbach was conned too. He was conned too. But what makes me think that he knows about this, he knows about innocence fraud. What makes me think he knows that is that nowhere in his books, 2 books, is, or at least the first book, is mention of this confession. I haven't gotten all the way through the second book. And it's presented as unreliable and bragging. It was a sworn affidavit. This guy was willing to testify, and yes, he was an inmate under penalty of perjury. But the guy drawing tea chambers in prison with his cellmate, he really had a need to look tougher than he was? Seriously? I mean, it sounds good until you really think about it. And that's what so many of these innocence fraud talking points are meant to do. Just sound good at the moment, including this Steven Avery didn't do it nonsense. And Brendan Dassey. They're 2 dangerous, deranged psychopaths. But they're going to also be getting on the Brendan Dassey was manipulated. Brendan Dassey, poor boo-hoo. I actually heard a live with Candace Owens in the Spaces on Twitter. I'm sorry, I will never call it X. Where she was asking the listeners whether Brendan Dassey should have gotten a shorter sentence because of his age. He was offered a plea deal because of his age. One reason. And yes, it was already looked at, Candace. Age is the most mitigating factor if you are under the age of 18 when you commit a crime in your sentencing. So if you get life without parole, it's because you've done something super heinous. And they believe that you most likely won't age out of your criminality. And I believe that this was the bond that brought those 2 together, is their shared psychopathy. And when I look at Brendan Dassey's confessions, not just clips where he's all shucksing the cops, I see a highly manipulative, criminally sophisticated kid who's grown up among other criminals and has learned the ropes from them. All right, I'm going to take one more quick break, and I will be back after this. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. But I love when people, in my audience pick and choose, I agree with you on this one, but not on this one. It's always like, why? Why this one? Because each case is more ridiculous than the next. They're all a scam. And if you are picking and choosing among the cases I've covered, there are a few good cases. Wrongful convictions do happen, just not very often. in my opinion. But these really celebrated cases, they need this media to sell the fraud. They need it. They can't do it without the public pressure. But the blame goes to people like Michael Griesbach, who, if he did not know that there was something he should have at least asked the courts to really examine and go through and argue it out, he should have known that Steven Avery was dangerous. And why was this picture was he, I guess my question is, did he know about this picture of the tea chamber before he let out Steven Avery? And why wasn't he let out with some kind of, why don't we have something in our country like they have in the UK, which is where you're really like being on probation, followed. But once they clear you, it's like, because we don't have, there is no exoneration in this country, really. Everything that they call exoneration is really just another token fraud of this movement. Little trophy from this movement. Why don't we demand that these kind of characters be watched? Coming up, the people who have reoffended, one of them a week after his conviction got vacated, or as this movement would say, he was, quote, exonerated, unquote. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please support this channel. I am the only one out here saying this talking about innocence fraud on a day-to-day basis, week to week. If you care about victims, and if you care about our criminal justice system, and if you care about fairness, please support the channel. Links are in the description of this episode. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody. I will be back very, very soon. Have a great one, everyone. Happy weekend.